To leave is easy, to arrive is hard. Life lessons and how to stay on track when things get difficult based on the book of Numbers and the book of Exodus. I'd like to share with you some information based on a lecture I heard from the former Chief Rabbi of England, of blessed memory, Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, who passed away a few years ago. We just finished reading the book of Leviticus in the synagogue in our weekly readings and moved on to the book of Numbers, also known as Bamidbar. And these two books, the book of Exodus and the book of Numbers, contains some striking similarities. Unfortunately, they both portray accurately the people of Israel as an ungrateful, quarrelsome nation with frequent complaints about the leadership and food and water, the present situation. Both books contain a major sin that the people of Israel commit. In the book of Exodus, you have the sin of the golden calf, and in the book of Numbers, you have the sin of the spies. In both books, you have the Almighty threatening to destroy the Jewish people and start again with Moses. And fortunately, in both books, you have an appeal by Moses on behalf of the people of Israel, and eventually the Almighty withdraws his anger and saves the nation of Israel. But there are obviously some dissimilarities between the two books. Exodus, as the name implies, is a book of leaving. The book contains a story of how the Jewish people, when they became slaves, and then how they are liberated from bondage in Egypt. The book is about leaving, as the name Exodus implies. The book of Numbers, also known as Bamidbar in Hebrew, Bamidbar in Hebrew means in the desert. So by the time you get to the book of Numbers, Bamidbar in Hebrew, the nation of Israel has already been in the desert for a prolonged period of time. They've already built the tabernacle, also known as the Mishkan. They've already received the laws that Moses gave to them from the Almighty at Mount Sinai. And they're no longer thinking about what happened to them in the past, the time in slavery and all the dangers that they faced, and the fact that they had to battle an army of the nation of Amalek and win. They are now on their way to the promised land. They're not thinking about what happened in the past, the fears that they are running away from. They're thinking about what they are going towards, namely the conquest of the promised land. They're no longer thinking of where they're leaving from. They're thinking about what they're moving towards. And so if you had just read this book for the very first time, you would think that by the time you get to the second part of the story, the book of Numbers, that the situation would be a lot easier. After all, the difficult things have already passed. After centuries of bondage in Egypt under the rule of the Pharaoh, the nation of Israel witnesses a series of miracles, plagues that afflict the nation of Egypt, the most mighty nation at the time. They're allowed to leave. They go to the Sea of Reeds, and it looks like they're about to be destroyed by the army of Pharaoh. And miraculously, they're saved at the Sea of Reeds. The sea opens up, the people cross. A few weeks later, they arrive at Mount Sinai. They receive the laws from the Almighty through Moses at Mount Sinai. They build the tabernacle, and they're on their way. They fight off the army of Amalek. They win. They have food that falls from the sky. They have a pillar of cloud, a pillar of fire to guide them and protect them through the journey. So you would think that by the time they get to the book of Numbers, that the situation would be a lot easier. But unfortunately, by the time we get to the book of Numbers, you find that this is not the case at all. You think the narrative would unfold more smoothly, more peacefully, but this is unfortunately not the case. By the time you get to the book of Numbers, when you start reading through the book of Numbers, you realize that the situation is much worse. Rabbi Sacks says that the mood is palpably darker. The rebellions against Moses are more severe. You see Moses' leadership is more hesitant. You see him succumbing to anger and despair more frequently. And I think it's clear that from these narratives in Exodus and in the book of Numbers, that the scriptures, the Bible, the Torah is trying to teach us a valuable lesson, which is that it is a lot easier to leave than it is to arrive. It is easy to flee from something than it is to arrive somewhere else. The nation of Israel is no longer a group of slaves when they leave Egypt, but that is where, unfortunately, their problems seem to begin. They've left this slavery, but now they find themselves both literally and figuratively in the desert, a barren place with leadership that they question and all kinds of travails. But even then, after they get through the difficult parts, as they're fleeing from, now when the difficult times seem to be over, The problems don't seem to have gone away by the time they get to the book of Numbers. And this is true also in politics. You can depose a dictator, you can overthrow a dictator, but that doesn't necessarily mean you build a civil society automatically after that with rule of law and respect for minorities and good governance. That doesn't just spring up. There's multiple examples of this. The Arab Spring in the last decade and a half is a great example. Failed states in North Africa and the Arabian Peninsula, you think would just overthrow the dictators and then democracy would just spring up, and that unfortunately did not happen. Also, the Bolshevik Revolution, 1917, came to depose the Tsar and bring equality and prosperity, and they brought neither. In fact, it ushers in the Soviet Union, which brought destruction as if that the world had never seen in the 20th century. Other good examples would be the Reign of Terror after the overthrow of the monarchy in France in the late 18th century. You have a reign of terror. Literally, a reign of terror is what it's called after that. So, and in modern Russia, I guess the same situation. In my lifetime, I saw the downfall of the Soviet Union, but then in most of my adult life, it has not been a smooth transition into democracy with equal justice under the law and equal rights and frequent elections. So it seems that just because you overturn something bad, that doesn't necessarily mean that something good will automatically spring up from it. And these are some political examples. You also have examples in Jewish history. In the 15th century, you had Jews that were forced to convert to Catholicism in Spain and Portugal. But then even after they go through this, they're not accepted as equals. So they flee from one way of life that was no longer approved by the government and the church in Spain. But then they flee from, but they can't easily arrive to prosperity by just going through a conversion. They're not accepted the way they thought that they would be. Another example in more modern times would be the Philharmonic in Vienna, Austria was the Philharmonic was directed by Gustav Mahler. Unfortunately, the band did not want to play for him because he was a Jew. He converts, and they still don't want to play for him. So he thinks that all he needs to do is flee from this and flee towards something else. And then when he arrives, then he'll achieve what he wants. And that didn't happen either. So in politics and as a nation, and then also, unfortunately, individually, we notice this as well. There's a biological basis for this. It seems that when we're fleeing from danger, we often gain tremendous strength, speed, literal speed. We become hyper-focused on the task, and the fact that we're fleeing from danger. Running from danger, we often have skills and abilities that we never thought that we never realized we actually possessed. But then to actually get to safety and then to build something after that, that is not a given. That is not necessarily as easy as you would think. In the Bible, in the book of Genesis, in the 13th chapter, in the 11th chapter, in the 31st verse, this is what differentiated Abraham from his father Terach. It says that Terach took his son Avraham, and they left this town called Ur Kasdim, and they were supposed to travel to the land of Canaan, but then when they got to a town called Haran, there they stayed. There Terach stayed. And then it was up to Abraham to go on to the land of Canaan, Eretz Canaan. So Terach had the ability to leave, but he didn't have the ability to arrive. He was able to leave Ur Kasdim, but the time he got to Haran, there it says he stayed. And it was up to Abraham, to continue his own journey. And in our own lives, we should all realize that life is a journey, whether it's for Moses, whether it's for Abraham, or whether it's for us individually or as a nation or a religious group that you are a part of, which is very important to know, therefore, at the outset, where you are going, what your destination actually is, what is the goal, to keep it in mind and to never give up. This is what's important. Where do you want to go? What is your destination? If I were to hand you, and that could mean that you're not in a good position now, but at least be real with yourself and honest with yourself and find where you are literally on the map, which could be very far from where you want to be. But as long as you know where you are, if you're truthful with yourself and honest with yourself, as long as you know where you are, it's much easier to know where you need to get to. And the distance could be very far. But if you have no idea, if you've never taken stock of your situation now, it'd be very hard to get to anywhere. To get to point B, you have to know at least where you are on the map in order to get there. You need to find point A in order to get to point B. So and bearing in mind, constantly that leaving is easy, but arriving is very hard. Leaving a relationship it could be, well, I'm just going to leave this, and then you think you'll move on to something else. And it may be very difficult at the beginning. Like the Jewish people left Egypt, they left slavery, but they were talking frequently about how good it was after they left. When things got difficult, they talked about how good it was in Egypt, and it wasn't even accurate. They were slaves, but they used to talk about the food that they would eat. They would sit around pots of meat and eat cucumbers, and they were describing as a past that wasn't even accurate. So we can often convince ourselves not to leave because the situation is, when we start to leave, that the situation we're leaving, no matter how bad it was, maybe it actually wasn't so bad, because we see that it may be more difficult to get to the destination where we'd like to go. It's difficult to leave. It is easier to leave than it is to arrive. It is much more difficult to build a good government with rule of law and respect for minorities than it is to just depose a tyrant. So when students and patients come to me and they have questions about their lives, their future, their career, their relationships, I always emphasize that it's very important to just sit by themselves for maybe a prolonged period of time, maybe more than you would expect. Take out a piece of paper with no distractions, no phone, and just begin to write and to dream. The most important thing is to dream. Dream about what you want. Well, I don't know what I want. Well, think about it. What kind of relationship what would you like to have? If you could have anything you want in your relationship, what would it be? Define it, discuss it, write it down, come up with some details. Where do you want to go? What do you want to be? What do you want to see? What do you want to have? What do you want to share? And with whom? What kind of contributions would you like to make to your community, to your family, to society, with your specific talents, with your specific skills at this point in history? What chapter, so to speak, would you like to write in the history of the country, of your community, of your family, in your job? What kind of difference would you like to make? Rabbi Sacks says that in dreams begin our destinations. W.B. Yitz said that in dreams begin responsibility. But it's important to do this. It's important to think about it at least once a month, once a week, to think about it. The dreams are where the direction of our journey begin. When you have the dreams, then you know the direction you're supposed to go. Once you have the dream, it always amazes me, surprises me that there are people that will never even take one day, not even 1 hour, to plan out their life. What do they want? What do they want in their career, in their relationship with their kids, with their job? New skills they'd like to acquire, things they'd like to have, things they'd like to share with other people, new skills they'd like to develop. But they'll take weeks and months to plan a vacation. But when it comes to their life, they just get up every day, as they say, taking it day by day, seeing what turns up, seeing what happens, taking it one day at a time. And it seems as if they have no direction. I remember wonderful phrase from Zig Ziglar, who said that if you're getting up tomorrow because that's what you did yesterday, if that's the only reason why you're getting up tomorrow is because that's what you did yesterday, then you won't be as good tomorrow as you were yesterday, because you're 2 days older and no closer to the goals which you do not have. Every day that goes forward that you're not getting closer to a goal, your life is getting 1 day shorter, and you have 1 day less time to get started and to get closer to achieving it. Now, this doesn't mean that you're not, just because you have goals and you have direction, that you're not going to be thrown off track. Of course you are. Things come up, you get knocked off course. It happens all the time. It may take years. But if you stay focused on your goal, if you write it down, if you look at it several times a day, some people would recommend putting it in the visor. So whenever you're at a red light, you put it down. It's constantly on your mind. You're constantly thinking about things that will help facilitate achieving that, both short-term and long-term goals. And once you have the goal and you have the destination, then you know the direction. Then if you lose the path, so to speak, like when I go hiking with my kids, we often lose the trail because we go off of the trail. But we know the direction we're going and we know the ultimate destination. You can always find the trail again if you lose it. But if you have no direction, you have no end goal, you have no destination, then there is no trail. Then it doesn't matter where you're going, because there's no point, there's no end destination. But when you have an end destination, when you have it well defined, you look at it frequently, then it's more likely that once things come up and blow you off track, events pop up and things happen, then you can more easily get back on track. The more you look at the goals, the more you look at the destination, the direction, the more easily it will be to find the path again, to get back on the right path again. The important thing is to know, for those that have a faith in a higher power, where do you think the Almighty wants you? Where do you think the Almighty wants you at this point in history? And where does the Almighty want you to go into the future? Where does He want you in the future? With the specific gifts that you have, what kind of contributions could you make? What were you put in the world to do? What were you put in the world to accomplish? The answer is literally the coordinates. Rabbi Sacks says the answer is literally the coordinates that you plug into your GPS device for the journey that we call life. When you know what you want, when you know what you want to acquire, then that is the destination, and then the direction follows. So to sum up, the Israelites, their journey throughout the desert made a number of mistakes. They focused too much on the past, which they created what they recalled, not even accurately, their time in slavery. They recalled it in a way that made it seem better than it actually was. They focused too little on the past, their struggles in the present, their concerns with food and water and the leadership, and not enough focus on the future. Too much spent on the past and the present and not on the future. When things became difficult, they had too much fear and not enough faith. They always thought the worst, not about the future possibilities. They didn't think enough. They thought about how things were and how things in the past were, the current, what it was now, what it was in the past, rather than what it could be in the future. And because of this, almost an entire generation died off and couldn't enter into the promised land. They were similar. They experienced the fate of Terach, the father of Abraham. They were able to leave, but they were not able to arrive. They experienced, as Rabbi Sacks says, exodus, but not entry. They were able to get only so far, but constantly thinking about the past without enough faith, without enough vision for the future, they were not able to take the next step and to risk to go the next step necessary in order to arrive rather than to just leave. The message is that it is much easier to leave than it is to arrive. Leaving is easy, arriving is hard. But in our own lives, if we stay focused on our goal, why we want the goal. I remember a story that Jim Rohn told about Earl Schoaf. He says, have a goal for $1 million. And he says, Jim Rohn says, that would be a great goal. He said, $1 million, that's enough zeros to impress your accountant. And he said, and Earl Schoaf said to him, and here's why. And Rohn said, the guy doesn't need to tell me why. He said, wouldn't it be great to have $1 million? And he says, no. He says, not for the $1 million, for what you must become in order to achieve that goal. What type of person must you become in order to achieve the $1 million? What kind of skills must you need to learn? How will you have to change? Whose help will you need to seek? Who will you have to befriend? What will you have to learn in order to achieve that goal? The development of yourself in the process of achieving the goal, maybe that's more important than actually the attainment of the goal. And having the goal will force you to learn new skills, develop in order to achieve that goal. It says in Don Quixote de la Mancha by Cervantes that the journey is greater than the inn. That the travel to get to the inn might be more valuable and more pleasing and more important than the actual arrival at the inn itself. And in our own lives, the goal that we have is important, and what we must become in order to achieve it is important. Staying focused on that goal, that destination, provides the direction in order to get there. It is difficult to arrive. It is easy to leave. It is hard to arrive. But by staying focused on that goal, hopefully when things get difficult, we will be able to stay on track by looking into the future and seeing the end point. I'm Dr. Adam Millman. Thank you very much for watching.